It's time to get back on the acoustic guitar. We need to make this thing shiny. I'm Jeff. You're watching Homebuilt Workshop. Stick around. What's going on, everyone? Welcome back to the workshop. I hope you're all doing awesome. I know I'm excited to get back to work on the acoustic guitar. It feels like it's been a long time, but really it's only been a couple weeks. This has been hung up in a safe place inside the house where it can stay nice and warm while the finish cures. And now we're ready to get it shined up and get things glued in place. I'm gonna jump right in and start on the neck. I think the neck is gonna take the least amount of work. For the most part, the finish is really smooth, and I don't think I'm gonna need to do a whole lot of level sanding. In fact, the majority of it, I believe I'm gonna be able to polish as is. We'll see how that goes once we get there, but I need to do a little bit of level sanding on the front and back of the headstock just to get it nice and flat, and then we'll break out the polisher and see how things go. Before we start sanding and polishing, I want to give you just a quick overview of some of the materials and supplies that I'm going to be using. To do the wet sanding, I'm using just this black wet dry paper. This stuff's made by 3M. I get it from my local auto body supply shop. This stuff works really good. I've got it in a bunch of different grits, but I'm mainly going to be using the 1000 and the 2000. I just cut it to size to fit whatever sanding block I'm using. And for sanding blocks, I use a whole assortment of different things. I've got just some hard pieces of rubber that I've cut down to fit in different areas. And I also have several of these hard foam rubber. These are Durablock brand. Not sponsored by any of these companies, but these are just the materials that I like to use. These guys are really nice too. I also get these from the Auto Body Supply House. I've got a bunch of different sizes, but I just use whatever I can find that'll work for the area that I'm trying to sand. Of course, it's important to have several good, clean microfiber cloths. You don't want to use just a regular cotton rag. Really, microfiber, I think, is the best for this application because it's nice and soft. Sometimes if you use a different material, you can be wiping the surface off and also adding scratches at the same time. You'll end up chasing your tail for hours if you do that because the rag is putting scratches in. Then you polish the scratch out, put more in, polish them out. Ask me how I know that. For all of the polishing, I'm using the 3M Perfect It system, which is a 3-step process. It uses 3 different grits of pads and 3 different grits of compounds. Now this one right here is not the exact 3M compound. This one is made by Presta. It's just a little bit cheaper alternative to the white compound that goes with this pad, but the 3M compound is basically the same thing. For the rest of them, I have the 3M compounds that goes with the 3M pads. This is an awesome system. It does take just a little bit longer because it is a 3-step process, but the finish you get is totally worth it in my opinion. To be doing the polishing, I'll be running these pads on my Milwaukee M12 polisher. This thing is great too. It works well. You can get into almost all of the areas on solid body guitars as well as acoustic, and it works really nice, really handy. Just got to keep the batteries charged. This comes with 2 batteries. One is the smaller one, which doesn't last all that long, but this little bit larger one works really well. So there's just an overview of some of the supplies that I use in case it helps you figure out what you might want to try for your build. I'll try to find links and put them down below for any of these items. In case you're looking for some, you can find the links down there. Let's get to wet sanding. I'm going to start off with some 1000 grit. I've got it soaking in some lukewarm water, and I'm using a rubber backing block. Using a backing block is very important at this step. You don't ever want to try to wet sand for your final finish using just finger pressure because you're going to get uneven pressure from your individual fingertips, and that could cause grooving in your final finish. We really don't want that now, so by using a backing block helps provide even pressure across the entire surface. I have an assortment of different sizes of rubber blocks that I use depending on really the size of the panel that I'm trying to sand. As you're sanding, it's going to create kind of a slurry, which is a mixture of the water in the finish that we're sanding off. It's important to stop and wipe that slurry off once in a while so you can check your progress. At this stage of the process, I just use a regular rag. I don't worry about a microfiber cloth just yet. I'm not worried about adding scratches until we get to the polishing stage. As you're checking the progress, I like to pick the piece up and hold it at different angles to the light. That helps highlight imperfections as the light hits different surfaces at different angles. After just a minute or two, that's looking nice and flat. I'm going to bump up to 2000 grit before we move on. Throughout this entire process, I'm going to be starting out with 1000 grit paper. I'm not going to progress to 2000 until the surface is perfectly flat. I want to use the 1000 grit to do the bulk of the work. If we bump up too early, it's just going to mean we have to do more sanding with a higher grit, and therefore it's just going to take us a lot longer. Once we move to the higher grits, the goal then is really to only remove the scratches from the previous grit. As I'm checking the work, I like to hold it up with a light raking across the surface. It really helps to see if you've got any imperfections in there. That looks pretty good. I'm going to sand the back now. I think I'm going to stop there. I'm going to try to leave this without having to sand it and just see how it goes once we hit it with the first grit of polish. I think it's going to polish out without wet sanding. And if it doesn't, it's easy enough to go back and sand later. Onto the body. Just like with the neck, I started out with 1000 grit paper. Now normally I like to use a larger sanding block when I'm working on a larger area. But here I'm starting out with the small sanding block and selectively working a couple of areas where I have visible high spots. You can't always see the imperfections, but when I can, I like to attack those first. Once I've addressed everything I can see, then I'll switch to a larger sanding block, which lets me level everything out much better. It's important to stop and wipe that slurry off. If that slurry is on there, it makes it really hard to see imperfections. What I'm looking for are these shiny spots in the finish. These shiny spots indicate a low spot. If we can still see these shiny spots, that means the surface is not flat and that we need to keep sanding. Here you can see I've now switched over to a larger rubber sanding block. And that looks like that does it for the top. Now we'll repeat that exact same process on the back. I think that's gonna work. Now the top and the back are sanded to 2000 grit. As I'm looking at the sides, I think I wanna try hitting them with some polish first before I do any sanding. Like the neck, the finish laid out pretty good, so I want to see what happens if we just try to polish this. If I don't have to wet sand that, that would save a lot of time. Let's break out some polish and see what happens. To get this all nice and shiny, it would be awesome to have a nice floor standing buffing machine. But I just don't have the space for that. Instead, I use this little cordless Milwaukee M12 polisher. Now this is rated at 2800 RPM. You can actually change that, but to use it as a polisher, 2800 RPM is the max, which is a bit less than using a cordless drill. If you use a drill, you have to be really careful that you don't spin it too fast and burn the finish. By having this 2800 RPM limit, keeps it a lot safer for buffing, and also the small size works really good for getting into all the curves on a guitar. This little guy comes with a Velcro backed pad. This is a 3-inch pad, and what I use is the 3M Perfect It polishing kit. These things are 4-inch discs. They're made to fit a 3-inch backing pad. There's 3 different grits. You use the white first, then we're going to switch to the black and then finish it up with the blue. Those also have compounds that go with each one, so it's a 3-step process, which can take a little bit of time, but the results you get are awesome. One thing before I start flinging compound around, I actually like to use an apron for that. There's not many applications where I really like to have an apron, but this is one of them because, well, you can see all the buffing compound all over this apron. This one in particular is from Peyton Guitars. Hit Mike up over at Peyton Guitars if you need some custom guitar templates. He does great work, super easy to work with, does custom work and everything. Check him out. Link down below as well. I'm not affiliated or anything, but Mike's awesome to work with. Shake well before using. I also always start out with a brand new clean microfiber cloth. Hopefully you can already see the difference. I can see the reflection difference in the camera. I hope you can too. That's just step one.
To do the buffing, I typically will break the top up into 4 sections and I'll work on only one section at a time. I'll first apply a little bit of compound, lightly spread it around, and then start buffing. I usually start off with a slow speed and slowly increase the speed with each pass. If you notice when I'm done buffing an area, I usually will put my hand on the top, and this is really just to feel the temperature. I want to make sure that the speed I'm using doesn't get the surface too hot. Once I've finished with the entire surface, then I'll use my clean microfiber cloth to remove the remaining compound that might still be on the surface. This is where it really brings out the shine.
That's just after the first application.
Moving on to the sides of the guitar, the process is really the same. The key thing to keep in mind here, I believe, is to be able to keep the instrument at a comfortable working height. And now we're on to the back. Again, I'll break it up into sections and only work on one section at a time.
It's getting there.
And moving on to the neck, I'll begin with the face of the headstock. And it's areas like this where I really like using this smaller buffing pad. It's super easy to get into some of the tight corners around the heel.
I think that wraps up at least the first round of polishing, but I'm not done yet. Remember, I'm using a 3-step system. Next up, I need to switch over to this black pad, which uses this gray compound. And then finally, to really bring out that shine, I'm going to switch to this last and final blue pad, which uses color-coordinated blue compound. It's kind of cool about this system. Everything goes together. The white pad goes with the white compound. Black pad, gray pad goes with the gray compound. Blue pad goes with the blue compound. And when you're done, you got a really nice shine. Since the process for these next 2 grits is exactly the same as what you've already seen, I'm going to skip this. We'll do this off camera, and I'll check back in with all of you once I've finished up with the last and final blue grit. And that does it. Just look at it. It's so shiny. after the first grit, it gets really shiny, and you don't think really that it can get a whole lot shinier until you finish polishing with the final grit. It looks awesome. The neck turned out great, nice and shiny. I got a little bit of cleanup of a little bit of the polishing compound to do, but overall, I'm really happy with this. I think we're gonna wrap this video up here. Originally, I was thinking maybe I would get everything bolted together and glued down, but I think we'll make this a standalone buffing video. In the next episode of the acoustic guitar build, that's where we're really gonna get serious. Glue this neck in place, get some frets installed, glue the bridge down, and maybe just complete this thing. Hope you guys enjoyed this polishing video. Thanks a lot for watching. Make sure you hit that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed. And if you are subscribed, thank you so much. I really appreciate it. Thanks a lot for watching, everyone, and we'll see you next time.